Hi, it's us. They Might Be Giants, your hosts here on Postmodern MTV.
Tonight, The Replacements Public Image Limited, Agent Blue, and songs by us. They Might Be Giants.
This is They Might Be Giants, direct from Brooklyn, New York.
Hi, thanks for joining us for coffee. I'm John.
And I'm John of They Might Be Giants.
When I say they're one of my favorite bands ever, I know I'm not alone in that. They've amassed a diehard following that's akin to a subculture at this point.
The songs have a wide range of subject matter, including nature, human relations, personal ambitions, and an old They Might Be Giants favorite, death.
I got into the Johns during my junior year of high school. To this day, I still struggle to find any artist or band that has remained as relentless in their pursuit of creativity for so long. In my mind, loving They Might Be Giants is, in a lot of ways, like loving music itself. They also may very well be the ultimate your favorite band's favorite band, which is an overused expression, but one that might be very true when talking about They Might Be Giants. There's an entire section on the They Might Be Giants wiki entitled Famous Fans, which details just that, the famous fans of They Might Be Giants, and these include former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Frank Black of the Pixies, David Byrne, Will Toledo of Car Seat Headrest, the Brothers Chaps of Homestar Runner fame, who they'd collabed with on multiple occasions, Neil Cicierega, Stephen Colbert, Elvis Costello, Bob Dylan, Open Mike Eagle. I know Open Mike Eagle's a huge fan of They Might Be Giants. I've seen them interact on Twitter, I'm pretty sure. Matt Groening. I don't know how to pronounce so many last names. Tim Heidecker, who told me on Twitter that Rush sucked. You are still wrong and Rush rules. John Darnell of the Mountain Goats. Mark Hoppus. Lin-Manuel Miranda. OK Go, who have opened for them on several occasions. I really have to get into OK Go. Natalie Portman, Jon Stewart, Weezer, and Weird Al Yankovic, among a ton of others. At the core of the band are the two Johns, Flansburgh and Linnell, who started the band as a duo but have maintained the backing of a full band since then. Since 2004, this backing band has included Dan Miller, Danny Weinkauf, and Marty Beller on the drums. Now, when attempting to describe all the things that make They Might Be Giants great, there are a few ways I could explain it all.
Okay, I like Twizzlers, Jawbreakers, and Sugar Bombs. John, the one without the glasses, and They Might Be Giants. And driving.
She's talking about John Linnell there, just for the record, but shouldn't discount Flans's hunkiness. You never discount Flans's hunkiness. Eventually, though, I settled on more arbitrary eras of time, as I think it's a good, solid way to try and quantify the band's sound and styles and chart how they've shifted over the years, how they've experimented with different stuff, and how they've polished a certain sound or ethos up throughout their extensive discography. Another reason why I picked eras of time is because I feel like there's a lot of stuff in They Might Be Giants' recent catalog that tends to get overlooked by more music nerd types, and I'm looking at you, internet's busiest.
There's a lot of their newer stuff that I don't care for, but like a lot of their older stuff is just so hilarious and playful, and just like, you know, I love pop music that's so deeply joyous and almost like innocent and has sort of like a very fun, colorful kind of character to it. You know, to me, that's what pop music should really be about, and They Might Be Giants definitely scratch that itch.
I'll emphasize again, the consistency of quality from this band over 40 years is just staggering. With all that being said, everything being said, you can find retrospectives and comprehensive histories of the band pretty much anywhere. I want this to, as well as that, be sort of a personal diary, a documentation of how They Might Be Giants have affected me personally, and the experiences that I've gone through with their music that has just made me fall in love with this band and their musical world on the whole. They Might Be Giants are a cultural force as much as they are a very personal one. Although fans of this band flock together in large numbers for shows and events, there are no two They Might Be Giants fans exactly the same. Far from it. I think taking this time to exclusively just retread the band's history would be a bit boring. Here are the eras we'll be going over today. Feel free to use the timestamps or anything to come back to it. I know this video is probably going to be pretty long. I also want to highlight two sources that I know for a fact, if I did not use them, if it were not for them, this video would not be getting made. These sources are the They Might Be Giants wiki, appropriately titled This Might Be a Wiki, and the 2002 documentary Gigantic, A Tale of Two Johns. The wiki is one of the most complete and dedicated attempts I've ever seen from any community to make sure that no piece of history from something gets lost. It is impressive on so many fronts. The documentary is fairly easy to find online, and if you're a They Might Be Giants fan, whether you're a diehard or just getting into them, it's definitely worth checking out. Okay, alright, spiel over. Let's get this over with. Despite Linnell being born in their eventual stomping ground of New York, John Linnell and John Flansburgh would originally first meet in Lincoln, Massachusetts as school children. The details of this are fuzzy to even the Johns themselves, but Flansburgh recalls a time in elementary school where students were asked to send get-well cards to Linnell, who was hospitalized at the time.
You had an accident and had to go to the hospital in like 6th grade or 7th grade?
And they made everybody write cards.
It was this like singularly bogus thing, but because our schoolmate, John, had to go to the hospital, we all had to write him letters saying like, get well soon.
Right, and 90% of these kids had never heard of me or met me.
Yeah,
So I got this giant pile of cards, which I probably threw them away, I'm sorry to say, John. I'd love to look through them and find yours.
Yeah, I think my
Who the
card
hell are
said
these
like,
people?
John Linnell, I don't know you.
The wiki details several secondhand accounts of the Johns first forming the bonds of their friendship to frankly uncanny degrees of specificity that raise the event to de facto urban legend status. These encounters include Flansburgh approaching Linnell with a play made up of, quote, 100 one- or two-line acts, and a comic by Linnell that included, quote, a centerfold of the authors as Nazis. The two would assuredly become friends during high school, making homemade comic books and both writing for their school newspaper. It was around this time that Flansburgh would begin collecting recording equipment, and the two would create their first recording together, a cover of Yoko Ono's song Don't Worry Kyoko, recorded at 17 years old. Linnell would state that the song was sung with, quote, faux Rod Serling voices. Flansburgh is unsure if this tape has even made it through the years since, but had revealed that he found it in 1996 and wasn't ready to go public with it yet. Also around this time, the duo would recall a friend by the name of Jimmy Mack that would introduce them to punk music.
We had a really good friend, this guy, Jimmy Mack, who turned us on to a lot of what essentially was kind of like proto-punk music. He played us the Ramones, and he played us Iggy and the Stooges, and all this stuff that in 1976, 77 was really, you know, pretty much a local New York experience.
You know, I think at that time, like, I was already geared up to be a complete elitist snob about music, but the thing about Jimmy was he was really into the most mass market pop stuff as well.
When the duo would leave high school and head off to university, John Linnell would join a band called the Mundanes, a band whose members would go on to collaborate with They Might Be Giants on several occasions. Flansburgh holds the band in high regard and recalls the band as having a powerful live show. He regarded it as strange that the band weren't getting signed in an era where he felt that tons of other new wave bands were striking major label deals. He ultimately remarks that it was perhaps this experience that contributed to some of They Might Be Giants' more unconventional aspects, as the two of them would take a future approach emphasizing fun, saying, quote, "How far can you get in a band if a band like the Mundanes can't get a deal?" John and John would eventually move in together in an apartment building in New York, and recall being excited to move to what they felt was a mecca of punk rock that hadn't quite been what it had cracked up to be. It was during this time that the seeds would be sown of their initial sound. An incredibly unique brand of rock and roll played as a duo backed by a tape recorder, and this sound would become a very important fixture for the history of the band.
I mean, we got here in 81. I think we were sort of fully expecting it to be this, like, glittering, kind of, punk rock heaven. And, there's just kind of nothing left.
We had a whole lot of conversations about how we were going to do this. And I think it started with one of us wanting to get a band and the other one wanting to do some more high-tech duo thing. And then we figured out a way to do something that we both liked, using just a reel-to-reel tape recorder playing straight through, just pressing play and going.
The tape machine became making a virtue of necessity, really, that it was a way to be able to let the song decide what needed to be done, not who could play what.
This method of recording would become the method of operation for the band, carrying over from their earliest demo recordings to their live shows. Around this time, they'd begin to write some songs that had become well-known staples of their first few albums, such as Spacesuit, Cowtown, and Alienations for the Rich. These songs were performed at some of their earliest shows. The reception of the band's live performances would gradually improve over time as they transitioned from New York punk scenes expecting something very different to the more receptive and left-of-the-dial venues that resembled performance spaces more than the traditional rock venue. One of these clubs that would remain important during this time was Darinka, a venue that They Might Be Giants would essentially become a house band for in all but name.
But luckily for us, within another couple of years, we kind of managed to make this lateral move into the real East Village, like, performance world.
One moment that would forever imprint itself on the band, their audience, and the way that the Giants are even talked about at all would occur in 1983, when Linnell would break his wrist while riding as a bike messenger. Along with some other issues threatening to hinder a lot of the momentum that they'd build up, they created the idea that would soon be fleshed out as Dial-A-Song.
This is the studio. This is my one-bedroom apartment that I lived in all through the 80s and 90s, and it's now my workspace. This apartment is also the home of Dial-A-Song, which is this trusty Recordicall 675, which can be found. This costs $2.
They might be giants, Dial-A-Song, not too short and not too long. Every time I sing along to They Might Be Giants, Dial-A-Song.
Dial-A-Song is one of the most notable aspects of the Giants' entire career. It initially began exactly as it sounds. You could call into an answering machine somewhere in Brooklyn, New York, and be greeted with a new They Might Be Giants song every single day.
Flansburgh came up with Dial-A-Song as sort of a stopgap measure, just as a way of producing stuff, of still keeping their visibility.
The coolest thing about it was just like, we gotta write more songs. Like,
Yeah,
no.
it was often a way that it was a way to get things done when we were kind of scratching our heads saying, well, I just wrote 10 songs. I don't need to write any more songs.
Right.
A play on a Christian phone service entitled Dial-A-Prayer, the service helped the Johns to continue their creative momentum, with the duo commenting that it was urging them to write more songs than they'd ever previously thought about.
We ran this ad in the Village Voice and on the back of the Village Voice. That was like kind of the primary way that it was advertised. Like, is this a business? No. Is this like promoting something? I was like, no. It's just my thing. Like, it's my little trip. Leave me alone.
Dial-A-Song is frequently and warmly regarded among longtime fans of the band, and stories of dialing in and sharing the discoveries made were spread throughout the entire time the phone number was in effect. Along with that, there was an inherently personal nature to Dial-A-Song that resulted in both some longer wait times as well as special experiences when you managed to connect through.
The thing about Dial-A-Song, and this is still the case, is that when you call up, you're the only person it's you and the machine. There's only one telephone line, so the tape is playing for you and you alone.
When I was in high school, I used to call up Dial-A-Song all the time, and there was a different song on there all the time. And I go, how the hell do these guys write and record a song every day? I think for a while there it was changed every day, or I don't know how long it was, but every time I called, it was a different song.
Dial-A-Song was discontinued originally in the mid-2000s, but has since been revived in several other instances, including some stints in the 2010s that would come to provide some of my personal all-time favorite tracks from the band off of albums like Glean, Phone Power, and Why. Dial-A-Song would also serve as another outlet for the Giants to broadcast their demo material, which would soon circulate among New York. This material would serve to even further expand their now growing fan base, and soon enough the band would find their music in the hands of critics, late-night television show personalities, and record labels. Michael Small of People magazine recalls gaining a hold of a demo tape created by the Johns in 1985. The demo was 23 tracks long and contained early versions of the majority of tracks that would soon grace the track list of their debut record. Soon enough, Bar None Records had approached the band to sign them for a debut album. In regards to the album, the Johns had written, "Working with the invaluable help of our truly dedicated sound man Bill Krause handling the production chores, we set about making our Bar None recordings very much in the spirit of our live show and home recordings." I want to take some time away from just recounting the history of the band. I want to do this throughout the video in order to add something a bit more personal to it, like I said earlier. So, that being said, I won't shock you here by saying that I think the self-titled record is awesome. I mean, everybody thinks it's awesome. It's an album that has persisted in the minds of internet-dwelling music historians and in-the-know hipster types alike. It's the coolest bending of the sounds of new wave and alternative rock for kids like myself that grew up perhaps associating these sounds with almost these like set-in-stone tropes, looks, and styles. And the Pink Album has taken on a pivotal role for music discovery in those senses. I know it did for me too, personally. A large amount of people were introduced to this album through the first in what would become an intensely memorable and classic string of music videos directed by Adam Bernstein, including Don't Let's Start and Put Your Hand Inside the Puppet Head.
Don't Let's Start was the first indie video to go into the rotation on MTV. The fact that it got onto regular rotation, I think, really was the opening shot in this kind of assault of the underground on MTV, and it eventually came to fruition in the early 90s.
Certainly made a big, huge impact on both MTV and its viewers. They Might Be Giants managed to be the first band to break through that sort of wall of bad hair band videos.
So I went to see them at a club called Dorinka and told them I would pay for it and I wanted to make a video out of one of their songs. And I remember Flansburgh calling up John Linnell going like, "I got a guy here named Adam Bernstein and he really needs to get famous." So it was, it was sort of funny. I also remember he was wearing purple nail polish at the time.
One thing I think is endlessly cool about these videos and their history is that the lineage of them has seemingly persisted all the way through to the modern day. You can draw a very squiggly line, starting from MTV and ending with YouTube, where these videos remain some of the first things you see when being introduced to the band. They're prominent, infectious, and they have an endless quality to stick in your brain, much like the music themselves and most things the band would do. This album would initiate the Giants' music as a godsend to independent music creators everywhere, with an influence in its sonic theming, aesthetic, and DIY ethos that would persist long, long after its release. Appropriately enough, describing the contents of the album is akin to describing the musical world that the Giants have created and endlessly built upon since its release, and is correspondingly difficult yet rewarding in tow. The accordion, the punchy synthesized bass lines, and the twinkly keys of Everything Right Is Wrong Again set the stage perfectly for this era of Giants music, and it only bursts more kaleidoscopically from there. I've got the same favorites everyone else has here. Puppet-Head is an earworm to end all earworms, a song that elicits jubilation and was seemingly placed perfectly to indoctrinate those that were unknowing to the band in a brief 2-minute time span. When I tell you this song truly wants to make you get up and dance like this, I mean it. Like, try doing it if you haven't, because it's a lot of fun. Don't Let's Start is one of the band's most well-known songs, and I still hear it decently frequently if I'm stuck in a car with satellite radio. This first string of They Might Be Giants records are lauded endlessly for their unique sound, but this one leaves me like the slightest bit puzzled in that regard. As we'll get into later, They Might Be Giants eventually gained a full band, which was met with a diverse and polarizing welcome. Yet, for as truly zany and lo-fi as some of these songs are, Don't Let's Start is perhaps one of the most poppy pop songs in the band's whole catalog, and that's not a slight. It's such an immaculately crafted pop song that it's no wonder as to why it's stuck around as long as it has. Much like Puppet-Head, it's just an immediately catchy song that you'll have a grand old time trying to get out of your head for the next 10 to 20 years. I Hope That I Get Old Before I Die was one song that I laughed about actively while singing. It relates back heavily to that defiance of alternative and new wave themes, at least for me and people of my age, that I was referring to earlier. 10 years after the release of this record, alternative rock will have firmly become a genre descriptor that could apply to any number of bands that sing about how much they despise being alive and feel apathy towards every structure of society that they've been born into. Meanwhile, here's They Might Be Giants, singing about how living is pretty cool, and they hope to do a lot of it before they, die, in the midst of guitar bends with strings seemingly tuned as loose as they can go and doing bird chants in unison. Just lovely. I could go over every song here. Side 2 starts off with Hotel Detective, a song that you'll find imitating to yourself in the shower repeatedly, followed with a classically beautiful track of She's an Angel and so many others. Rhythm Section 1 Ad may be a song that could be used to string together several different events in the Giants' future history, as the very self-referential nature of the lyrics regarding different agents looking at them with dollar signs in their eyes are matched only with a hook, essentially translating to me personally as, hey, do you guys need a drummer? Speaking of lyrical translation, what are these guys even talking about anyway? On the They Might Be Giants wiki, there is an entire section that you can access on nearly every single song listed, entitled Interpretations, where members of the wiki can submit their own interpretation of They Might Be Giants' notoriously oblique lyrics. Puppet-Head is a song about obsessive-compulsive disorder. No One's Gonna Change My Clothes is about digging up skeletons at a cemetery only to discover that you've become one yourself. Actually, it's about a gambling addiction, I think. Hideaway Folk Family is about everything from an Amish family to doomsday preppers to the Holocaust. Apparently, I don't know. One thing that's for sure clear is that no matter how wacky, upbeat, and poppy these instrumentals are, the lyrics sure can get pretty dour.
Kind of a downer idea, but it's, it's in this, it's beat. Everybody dies, frustrated and sad, and so many of their songs are like that.
There's a pretty relentless thread in the text of our songs, especially in the first, the first 15 years of our songwriting. That's pretty relentlessly, kind of earth-shatteringly dour.
But there's different ways to view this endless interpretation. Some might view it as quite a personally fulfilling experience that serves to relate to the music in unique ways, with each person letting a vivid image play out in their mind while listening, attempting to turn it into words. Some might view it as a race to genuinely understand the meaning going through the minds of the Johns as they write. But you might be in for some bad news if that's the case, assuming they're not just being coy.
When we try and interpret them ourselves, sometimes we have to do an interview where they say, well, what's this song all about? And I never thought about what the song's about, and then we try and come up with some explanation for it, and I think it makes the song seem really foreign.
I really feel like a lot of the times people get everything about it, and the things that they think that they don't get don't exist. You know what I mean? That there's nothing missing in their understanding of Particle Man.
Or maybe not, I guess, because as I was writing this, they posted this meme to their Twitter account. Oh man.
I think there's more meaning to DMBG's songs than people realize.
Why can't you enjoy their music without projecting your own analysis on it?
Music can provide insights even if those insights weren't the original intention of the artist.
The Johns said to stop overanalyzing their songs.
Alienations for the Rich explores the limitation of VFX efficacy to spur change in a capitalist society where the working class are too busy trying to survive to critique their own need for an emotional release via art and music.
In 1988, the duo would release their follow-up album, aptly named after the town in Massachusetts in which the pair would meet. Their follow-up was Lincoln, originally created with the working title Lincoln Calling before realizing that maybe Lincoln wasn't as glamorous as London. The famous album art showcases a podium photographed by Carol Pittman, with John Flansburgh's grandfather, Brigadier General Ralph Hospital, and John Linnell's grandfather, Louis T. Linnell, flanking each side. The official They Might Be Giants website showcases the usage of the new Alesis HR-16 drum machine, along with some, quote, primitive sampling devices, facets that would serve to further flesh out the unique sound they had built upon in the preceding decade. Like the album that preceded it, Lincoln was marked by a notable spread on MTV, backed by the similarly popular video for the single Anna Ang, a song that has remained as, if not more popular, than the singles from their self-titled record. Lincoln is a similarly fantastic album, and a lot of Giants diehards will tell you it's the best one. I think they're wrong, but hey, I won't begrudge you if you think this is the Johns working at peak form. There's certainly an air around it that manages to become intoxicating. I think this record may have made more They Might Be Giants fans than every other album not named Flood. Anna Ang is great, but in regards to the very pop-flavored songs on this record, I think I'd have to go with Purple Toupee. It feels like a mastery of the obtuse yet maddeningly catchy style the band has honed to this point. I love the dichotomy of the wordly synthesized bass to Flansy's sharp staccato guitar riffs. They'll Need a Crane is perhaps the example of happy song, utterly depressing structure that they're known for. It is a downright danceable and melodically whimsical little ditty about the horrors of divorce. Snowball in Hell is a moment of compositional tradition that waltzes through some truly beautiful progressions, with the highlight, of course, being the sample towards the middle of the track. It's a sample of a cassette from 1977 entitled How to Master Time Organization by Paul J. Meyer, and its mere placement there is a giant middle finger to an entire corporate way of thinking, or at least a heartfelt look at its rather bleak nature.
I didn't expect to find a salesman drinking coffee this late in the morning. How long you been here, Joe?
Oh, I don't know, I guess 45 minutes maybe. Why do you ask?
You must be making a lot of sales, piling up good income.
Oh, I'm doing all right. I could do better, but... Oh, I get it, Paul. Back on that old time is money kick, right?
I'm not back on it, Joe. Still on it.
My ultimate favorite here is Where Your Eyes Don't Go. That guitar solo at the end is something that requires repeated listens every time I even think about it. The popularity of They Might Be Giants is starting to become glaringly apparent. Along with the videos on MTV, the Johns would find themselves perched at the top of the nascent college radio charts, something they weren't even entirely familiar with until they had already conquered it.
We didn't really comprehend what college radio meant, and so the whole world of college radio was kind of this eye-opener. The CMJ charts and stuff like that were introduced to us, or at least to me, when we were like on the top of that chart. You know, that was how we found out about it.
You're number one on this thing you don't know anything about.
The time was right. It was the dawn of the tribulations of any truly good rock band. Their ludicrously catchy, entirely unique musical stylings and aesthetic had charmed just one too many people. Yes, it was time for They Might Be Giants to sell out.
For those who were ready to declare them sellouts in East Village, this was the occasion that would warrant it. You know? Oh yeah, people were. Yeah, I mean, the more clear it became that the Giants were going national, and the more bitchy people got.
I know the prospect of calling They Might Be Giants sellouts is downright funny in 2022, but trust me, buddy, you haven't even seen the half of it. Susan Drew worked A&R for Elektra Records and was adamant about signing the Johns as soon as she could. Susan was also adamant about letting the Giants maintain creative control over their work, as she had complete confidence that the band would find success. Other labels had come calling too, but it makes sense that Elektra would be the label the band would eventually settle down for, especially when supplemented by stories that detail label executives not even knowing which John was which.
When I first became interested in They Might Be Giants, I was working at Polygram Records. That was in 1986. And really tried to get them signed to Polygram at the time. About a year later, I left Polygram for Elektra Records, and at that point it was a no-brainer. Everyone at Elektra understood what the value of They Might Be Giants was.
Elektra was also home to the Pixies and the Sugar Cubes and people like that, who also did great work at around the same time on the same label. So you know, it wasn't outside of the realm of possibility that They Might Be Giants could also put out a great album.
Why is the world in love again? Why are we marching hand in hand? Why are the ocean levels rising up? It's a brand new record for 1990. They Might Be Giants' brand new album, Flood.
This is the promo film for They Might Be Giants' third album, Flood. And if the band hadn't already been fully shot into mainstream consciousness, this is the album that would do it. Flood shared many similarities with previous Giants albums, but also had a few key differences. Despite only being recorded a few blocks away in New York from where they had recorded their past two albums, this recording process was all digital. There was a great familiarity to the processes and instruments that the Giants were using to record this record, but the digital recording and some more fleshed out additions of guest musicians threw some wrenches into the matter. Within the 33 1/3 account of Flood and its impact by S. Alexander Reid and Philip Sandefire, apologies if I'm butchering that, there's an account of Flansburgh meticulously assembling the song Istanbul on an early Macintosh computer. And when a friend named Alan had looked at him after Flans went to go use the bathroom, he was pale as a ghost. Quote from John Flansburgh, "Everything was gone. It was horrible. I'm actually not sure if I cried. I don't know what happened, but I wasn't there. I was already really tired. But then I was given the task of actually having to reprogram the entire thing again, which in some ways was actually better because I'd done it once, and so the next time around it was just a little more focused." Another key difference this time was money. Now on a major label, They Might Be Giants had a major label recording budget, but claimed to have spent 2/3 of it on just 4 songs. Istanbul, Your Racist Friend, We Wanna Rock, and a single that would become the biggest hit in traditional senses that the band would ever release.
I'm your only friend. I'm not your only friend, but I'm a little glowing friend. But really I'm not actually your friend, but I am.
Especially to the uninitiated, Birdhouse is the Giants' signature song. It reached number 3 on the Modern Rock chart and number 6 on the UK singles chart, and its presence in popular music is still quite a strong one to this day. Despite the song always being intended to be released as a big single, it still retains endless amounts of uniquely John charm through its 18 key changes. Linnell was reportedly recording demos of the song when he had attempted to make it sound, quote, more impressive and professional sounding, to which producers Clive Langer, me and last names this video, I do not know what's up with it. Alan Winstanley responded, "You wrecked it. Why are you playing this? You ruined it." Linnell agreed, and the version of Birdhouse heard on Flood today was saved. This song is famous as a widespread example of the Giants' oblique lyrical style, with the big open secret of their catalog in this regard being that this song is indeed about a nightlight, or more accurately, written from the perspective of a nightlight.
My name is Blue Canary, one note spelled L-I-T-E.
Their performance of the song on The Tonight Show is one of the single best performances on any TV show ever, highlighted by classic band leader Doc Severinsen's sped-up count-in that resulted in the entire band absolutely ripping through the song at what seems like twice the speed. Birdhouse is far from the only song off of Flood that would remain a staple of the band's catalog, however. The most obvious second track to highlight here is Particle Man, another deceptively simple but somehow insanely introspective track that high school debate classes discuss the lyrics of. Referring to the titular character, or Triangle Man, or Universe Man, or Person Man is a flare signal up to any other Giants fans in the room that you're ready to geek out about the band with them. The band's cover of Istanbul, Not Constantinople has become perhaps the most well-known rendition of the song that's ever been recorded. And Your Racist Friend is an eternally pleasing, swinging ode to that one dickhead you're forced to be around at any type of social gathering who lets the mask slip off for just long enough to realize that you never want to talk to them again. It's a fantastic example of the polish that Flood has compared to its predecessors. Despite being far from a complete tonal shift of the past two albums, Flood has a sheen to its tracks that do such a wonderful job of delivering up the distinct Giants sound into the cleanest, most irresistible sonic package it's ever had to this point. The opening of Sapphire Bullets of Pure Love sounds like the fullest realization of They Might Be Giants, the new wave band. Delays-soaked plinky key riffs combined with a tuneful percussion akin to hitting a fire alarm bell with a drumstick give way to lengthened vocal samples dripping with purpose. Letterbox is a, in my opinion, classic Giants piece with the proportions one might expect, gandering at the previous two albums' track list, but meticulously assembled with that sheen I mentioned earlier, resulting in the song's turnaround being even more strong than anything that, in my opinion, they could have previously hoped to do.
Too little soon to make noise about loving. There's no time for sorrow. Run around in the rain with a hole in the brain to tune my. Oh, I never know what you find when you're gonna be letterbox tomorrow.
Dead is one of my favorite songs ever written. A piano ballad with the vocal melody that provokes images of the Proclaimers, of whom Linnell claims the vocal interplay was ripped from, but met with a lyrical imagery uniquely beautiful, even for this band's catalog. A grandiose question phrased so delicately and matter-of-factly. Succeeded with the realization that eternal boredom might be the greatest death of all. Flood is Flood. There's truly little I can say that hasn't already been said about it. I don't think it's an understatement to say it's both the Giants' most notable album to the world of pop music at large, as well as the closest the band would come to summarizing their entire ethos in album form. It's legendary for a reason, but it's not my personal favorite. That changes on any given day. When someone asks you what your favorite They Might Be Giants album is, forming an answer is very similar to when somebody asks you what your favorite song is. You scroll through your brain for some easy answers, but most often you just kind of stick to one. It's less a matter-of-fact statement of concrete personal truth and more of a kind of abstract exercise. Regardless, I usually come back to this one.
Hello. We're John and John of They Might Be Giants. We can't talk now because we are preparing for our worldwide tour, but we have prepared these slides especially for you to help explain Apollo 18, that difficult fourth album splashing down in 1992. Apollo 18 features 18 new songs, including our new single, The Statue Got Me High.
One cool fact about Apollo 18 is that after its release, NASA had selected They Might Be Giants as the musical ambassadors for 1992's International Space Year. An even funnier fact is that the band reportedly didn't really know what this entailed at all. Linnell was quoted as saying, "We don't have a super clear idea of what it is we're supposed to be saying about it. We're supposed to be included on lists of events happening in connection with International Space Year." In other words, on a particular month, they'll say in some town that there's this lecture about space telescopes, and then there's this They Might Be Giants concert. It does kind of seem weird, disconnected to us. Flansburgh is quoted as saying, "It doesn't mean anything, actually. We're like the musical equivalent of Tang." During the afterglow of the post-Flood success and the planning processes for their next album, the Johns found themselves at a number of crossroads, as all popular bands do. Elektra Records had initially approached Elvis Costello to produce the band's follow-up, but the Johns felt that the success of Flood had proved enough that the band could produce their albums themselves. After all, it was the music they made with this DIY process that had initially caught the eye of Elektra in the first place. And I'm presuming that even those original fans from New York that had branded the band as sellouts could still readily admit that the hands-on approach the band had been known for was a significant factor in producing many of the facets that people loved about the band. This would be one of the first ripples between the band and Elektra, but not the last. Apollo 18 is notable for the first noticeable shifts towards fully fleshed out instrumental passages and lush arrangements in the band's catalog. While it still noticeably maintains the signature sound produced by the band as a duo, the decisions to shift more towards the intentionally elaborate stick out here. If songs like Sapphire Bullets, We Wanna Rock, and Road Movie to Berlin represented the seeds planted towards these ideas, then Apollo 18 had firmly watered them, and the results are really, really great. Upon hearing this album during my personal Giants craze in high school, I was texting my brother about both it and them nonstop. We've shared music we love with each other for well over a decade, so I hope I wasn't annoying him too badly. I distinctly remember the text I sent him one night that I personally believe got him over the hill to give the band a shot. It was something like, "Dude, you have to listen to this band. They wrote a song about the anatomy of mammals, and I'm pretty sure it's a masterpiece." Something about the almost classical way in which these guitar plucks kept homing back in on this E note just freaking tickled me pink, I tell you. It was unapologetically a personally challenging notion against the seriousness of the music that I had become accustomed to. I was firmly in awe of this song to the point of it taking up major brain space for me for days on end. It was a song detailing the different types of mammals and their need for milk, their place in the evolutionary chain, and their metabolism rates. I think his personal favorite is The Guitar, a monstrously catchy song hallmarked by some infectiously groovy strumming in between interpolations of The Lion Sleeps Tonight. There's an aura about this song that I think would infect future music from the Johns. It's the same aura surrounding a lot of their music going forward. It dedicates itself incredibly well to live performance, and the punchiness of those horns provokes urges to jump up and down like a pencil on a trampoline. See the Constellation is another personal favorite. If I fail to muster up as many insightful remarks about this one, I do apologize. It's just because I still have that sample stuck in my head. The vocal harmonies on the chorus are just top tier. But you cannot have a discussion about Apollo 18 without talking about its centerpiece, a staple at live shows and an all-time classic for any fan of the band, Fingertips. Fingertips is a stretch of micro songs, with the final song reaching just over 1 minute. The next longest song is 28 seconds. Fingertips has been the subject of some confusion for me personally, as the liner notes of the CD describe the album as meant to be listened to on shuffle mode. Correspondingly enough, the fingertip tracks are strewn throughout the remaining track list, and the songs serve as random interludes between any two tracks. Yet the band have always played the tracks as one piece, and quotes from the band detail it being a very methodically constructed suite of tracks, showcasing what is essentially a curated collection of hooks.
Personally, I value Fingertips as a constructed piece of music, and I think a full listen through is something that any prospective fan of the band should do ASAP. It's wonderful. It packs in the band's ability to implant these earworms into its most concentrated form. Never could single lines be this catchy from any other band on the planet. Regardless, most streaming services play them as one combined track anyway, and they truly do make for a fantastic experience at the end of one of the band's finest records, and one of my personal favorite records ever. After Apollo 18, Elektra Records continued to push one request onto the band that they've had in place since Flood. That request was, please get backing musicians. The idea of the Giants expanding to a full band had been a contentious one to this point already, and it was one that the Giants themselves were not too fond of at first.
We felt very strongly that they needed to get a band right after Flood.
And I think our natural response was, just, leave us alone, because, what do you know? What do you know about how to be a success in rock? Here we are, barely successful at all.
I encouraged them to do it because I thought that they had really come as far as they were going to come in their stage show using the tape.
Yet the band did eventually enlist the help of a full band during the Don't Tread on the Cut Up Snake tour in support of Apollo 18. There's a legitimate contentiousness towards this moment. Even if, in the succeeding years, the band would warm to the idea of a full band both in the studio and outside it, some fans were so heartbroken that the Johns would no longer be playing as a duo that they were, no joke, outside of shows, protesting, flyers and all.
Some of the hardcores actually established a boycott. For the first year of the band, they were
we go to gigs and there would be people outside with leaflets saying, don't go to the show. You know, they have a band.
I think there was a feeling among us that were there in the early days that it was a bit of a betrayal of what we'd come to know and love.
When the duo became a band, I loved it. The live shows are just, I find, 20 times better. And they were good before, but I like the full band sound.
A notable event also occurred in 1992, one of the events cited as the band's final straining point with Elektra. Susan Drew, who had pursued the band relentlessly before the release of Flood, had left Elektra for another opportunity. The Giants' popularity internally within Elektra began to decline right as the grunge revolution was beginning to occur. The definition of alternative rock was changing.
One of the most difficult things that can happen to an A&R person is to be offered another opportunity at another label. And that happened to me in 1992.
And when Sue left, it was kind of the beginning, I mean, it was essentially the beginning of the end for us there, because we're not a band that everybody gets, and we're certainly not a band that everybody at record companies get.
Of course, around, late 91, there was the whole, alternative rock revolution, and you had these, really, grungy, loud bands taking over the record industry. And there didn't seem to be a place for a band like They Might Be Giants.
Thinking in '96, we had like one day in Tokyo. We had a travel day to Tokyo with that night off, and then we had a show in Tokyo, and we were out of there the next day. And the band and the Johns and everybody wanted a chance to hang out in Tokyo a little bit. So the label comes to us and says, how about doing a live coffee house type performance, when you get into town? And the Johns said, no, we don't want to do that. We're going to be really busy. We want some hang time. I think a couple days went by and we got another call saying, we really like you to do this. And the Johns said, no, we're not going to do it. We've promised our band they're going to get to see Tokyo. They're going to get to hang out a little bit. So I think no was said 3 or 4 times. And as it would go up the ladder, the Johns would just say, no, please listen, N-O. We get to Tokyo, we're on a bullet train, and we get off the bullet train, and there on the platform is the label rep ready to take us to the coffee house performance. Bless their hearts, they stood there on the platform and said, this is really uncomfortable for us, we don't like this position, we're not going to do it. And they didn't do it. And that was pretty much at the end of the relationship with Elektra, and maybe that was the final nail, but I really think at the time that the Giants were so happy to move on also, because they weren't getting the attention at all, and the communication was horrible, and it culminated there on a platform in Japan.
Way back at the beginning of this video, I cited a desire to highlight some of my favorite music from the Giants during recent years, and this is part of the reason as to why. I think there are still a large amount of colloquially termed music nerds that simply do not put enough respect on the band's music with the addition of a full band, and I'm not just talking about Fantano. If your knowledge of this band's music ends right around here, you've done yourself a giant disservice.
Boo! You stink!
During high school, after I had initially gotten into all the band's music up to this time period, I was perusing my local record store with my brother, looking to expand my still admittedly pretty small vinyl record collection. Their Giants catalog was pretty limited. I already had Flood, but I was looking for more. Flipping through the bins, I came across John Henry. I decided, hey, screw it. I had been pretty blindly accepting a perceived consensus that this is the moment where the band had lost some kind of abstract it factor, and the addition of these instrumentalists had taken something away from the soul of the band I once knew. Yeah, about that. When I got home that night...
There's a girl with a crown and a scepter who's on WLSD, and she says that the scene isn't what it's been, and she's thinking of going home, that it's old.
I laid on my goddamn floor all goddamn night, and I just kinda soaked it all in. This is my number 2 answer when people ask me my favorite Giants album, and this experience has a lot to do with it. I won't delve into every track here from now on as I've done with the past few records, simply because if I do, this video will be even longer than I know it's already going to be. But please take my word for it when I say that this record contains some of the strongest songs of the band's entire catalog. It's just important to highlight the foundational truths here that have stuck with the band through these succeeding eras, much like the previous truths stuck with them through the band's preceding eras. John Henry is nothing short of fantastic. It's the ground zero of the band's ability to adapt their songwriting prowess into the shape of a fully featured rock band. These songs are routinely around 3 minutes in length, and while any other band upping the time of their song length might be seen as them gaining something inherently, it'd be natural to think that They Might Be Giants might be losing some kind of ethereal aspect of their songwriting prowess, but that's not the case. So many things are gained in this process. Songs like AKA Driver, I Should Be Allowed to Think, and No One Knows My Plans set the stage for the absolute best the band would have to offer for the entirety of their whole careers. Sure, perhaps the zaniness of the MIDI synthesizers and tape reels aren't here as much, but there's a richness of detail and an energy within the playing that jolts the band very suddenly and very fantastically, in my opinion, into a new frontier. What I think might have really rubbed some kind of diehard indie heads the wrong way here was the more conventional nature of the song structures. This sounds like They Might Be Giants truly adapting and encompassing the form of a traditionally structured rock band, and they do it so well. Placing a magnifying glass on The End of the Tour, one of the most beloved tracks of this album and this band at large, there's a feeling of genesis here. The iconic moment when the band bursts into the fuzzy, heavy, yet romantic sound is an all-timer. The band has now shifted into something, and the growth is thrown into the face of the listener in such a profound way. I subconsciously link Factory Showroom and Long Tall Weekend in my mind, probably to my own detriment. Again, in the presumably futile effort of brevity, and for the sake of whatever actual point probably should be maintained by anything masquerading as an essay, I'll go over some brief highlights post-John Henry and pre-turn of the millennium. Factory Showroom was the band's last album for Elektra Records, and one that I don't think I fully appreciated until attending my first Giants live show. At an uncharacteristically brief 13 songs, the band would further explore their newfound changes in sound established on John Henry. Tracks like New York City, How Can I Sing Like a Girl, and James K. Polk proved to be perhaps the biggest growers of the Giants catalog for me personally. And there's a personal satisfaction from hearing these tracks live with a full band that further accentuates the richness that comes from a full band lineup. Pat Dillett would produce this album along with the band themselves and would go on to produce 14 more albums alongside them, extending all the way to the present day. The band issued a press release for the album entitled A Guided Tour of Factory Showroom, detailing the recording at both, quote, fancy and unfancy studios in New York City, including their own, quote, apartment-shaped personal studios. Reading their own brief summarizations of their own material is a delight, as they sell them in the way that only the Johns can. Number 1, SEXXY. The opening track and first single is a pretty big departure for us, as it is our first ode to getting it on. James K. Polk's one is just like a brief summarization of the history of James K. Polk's political candidacy, and it's just fantastic. You gotta love that ode to getting it on too, with such dynamite sexuality such as there she is, standing on the bed, cookie in one hand, wig on her head. 3 years later, the band would release Long Tall Weekend, again co-produced by Pat Dillett and with some personal favorite really cool artwork by Michael Kupperman. I ask you again, humble video essay washer, for a bit of slack in regards to these last two albums. They Might Be Giants have 23 studio albums, and sometimes when it comes to Long Tall Weekend, my brain resembles this when recalling personal memories of experience with it. This is no statement of the quality of the record. As with the two albums that preceded it, I loved this moment in time aesthetically for the band. From the outset, the mix on all these instruments is so pleasing to the ear. This is perhaps the cleanest that the band would sound throughout this entire obligatory era of time. Edith Head and Older would reemerge on later projects and in live sets as more grandiose theatrical versions of themselves, but from within the lens of this album, their structure and foundational songwriting appeal are plain to see. One of the most notable things about this album, now removed from the band's contract with Elektra, is that it was one of the first ever to be released exclusively to the internet.
There's a ton of press about what digital music was going to do and what the numbers were going to be like and how it was cannibalizing record sales and retail was going to freak out and record companies were clinging to secure formats and all of that sort of stuff. And the Giants came to eMusic, basically said, we have a piece of work that's pretty much finished. We're going to call it Long Tall Weekend. that we like to distribute exclusively through eMusic. Online. No one's ever really done that before. And as a result, they are the highest selling band on the internet.
The internet has been very, very kind to They Might Be Giants, and vice versa. It makes sense in every single way you could ever slice it. It was how I came across them, and it's currently how many, many people come across them. I commented earlier about how it's really cool that you can draw a timeline from the release of the band's first music videos to the age of YouTube, with those videos still remaining some of the first things you get when you search them online. Within that initial clip I played of Fantano, he commented about how Dial-A-Song was strikingly prophetic at predicting things like music streaming platforms. Within the gigantic documentary, there's a highlighted focus on how the Giants fan base doesn't seem to age. At every They Might Be Giants show, there's this thorough mix of millennials and now Zoomers that find themselves infatuated with the world of They Might Be Giants, a musical world actively cultivated and commented upon by the Johns themselves as hard to quantify. Sure, there might be a historical tendency to chalk these things up to coincidence or fortune, but I think there's something more to it. Those initial songs that people first called in to hear decades and decades ago were crafted at least partly with the method of delivery in mind, and they dedicate themselves incredibly well to music consumption in similar manners that we have today. Those early songs are immediate, punchy, bit shorter, and endlessly catchy. These qualities bloomed into full evolutions of song structure and image, and I think this era has been just as kind. As we'll get into further, the band would find mutual admirers in the brothers Chaps of Homestar Runner fame, and it's all the further proof that the Giants' lineage, stylistic evolutionary in tow, has found its way to direct and cutting-edge delivery methods of music. This has been done both through intentional movements by the band themselves as well as the connection found between creatives that have come to find themselves within that musical world of the Giants. It works symbiotically to help drive that ever-youthful fan base of the Giants, with the other good contributing factor in that symbiosis being the fact that they just write such damn good songs. The band's first ever Grammy Awards came from dedicating the eternally present theme of the likewise eternally present Malcolm in the Middle, known as Boss of Me. I again apologize for the brevity of those last two studio albums. I had these eras in my head as a way of emphasizing some key points, and totally forgot that the band had the gall to release two fondly remembered albums with fan-favorite tracks on them that still remain staples at live shows, the bastards. Now, this is roughly the point in time where the gigantic documentary ends. There are still 20 more years of fantastic material to get through. This video may tend a bit more towards personal experience and opinion more than a historical document from here on out. Funnily enough, the first major studio release of this era starts out with one of the band's most notorious albums, famous and infamous alike for the aura surrounding it at the time of release, alongside its legacy. The Giants continued their partnership with eMusic to procure TMBG Unlimited, a $10 per month subscription service that provided fans anywhere from 8 to 23 songs a month, including rare takes of songs, sneak peeks of future albums, and an entire recording of the album Flood played live. One of the first sneak peeks that subscribers got was for the album Mink Car, an album teased throughout the gigantic documentary as the band's next big project. The producer list looks much bigger here, and the songs follow suit, weaving through multiple stylistic shifts that found the band prominently delving into experimentation with digital technology once again. Mink Car has only very recently gotten its first pressing on vinyl. This year, 2022. That's not entirely rare. TMBG have had many albums that have taken on many forms when it comes to release formats. The Johns referred to this album as their lost album, and describing the release cycle for this album as unfortunate is quite an understatement. Mink Car was released via compact disc format on September 11th, 2001. Yep. I know Gigantic was released in 2002, but watching those clips of the band workshopping the record and preparing for its release is very strange knowing that fact. The band very obviously labored over it, and the risks taken and depicted within the documentary both feel paramount to the band's creative process on the whole, as well as wholly unique to this new frontier the band were faced with during the new millennium. It's the only They Might Be Giants album ever to have gone out of print at one point or another, which I guess gives it its distinction as being the lost album. Via a barrage of unfortunate events punctuated by the obviously devastating effects of its release date, the label it was released on, Reckless Records, quote, almost instantly collapsed. As inherent to the nature of all these records produced while I was either yet to have entered the world or in an infantile state, I have a bit of a different view of it. Mint Car did indeed have this mystique about it from a brief reading of its Wikipedia page even. Pitchfork bashed it. There was much less information about it than previous albums, yet within its contents you'll find some striking material, as you should probably come to expect by now. I downloaded Mint Car onto a secondhand iPod Classic during my brief stay on campus in Philadelphia, and I'd find myself gravitating towards it more than any other Giants album during that period. There was something about its particular idiosyncrasies in the Johns catalog that drew me particularly well during trips on SEPTA trains. The 3-song stretch of the title track, the exceedingly interesting and quotable Wicked Little Critter, and the personally cathartic Finish with Lies were all tracks that, if I had gotten with the times and started streaming, would have ended up firmly on my most played tracks of the year. Hovering Sombrero, Bangs, Another First Kiss all find the Johns further developing and polishing their craftsmanship in the full band setting, while some of the album's most notable moments come within the steps taken outside of the already nascent comfort zone they'd found themselves in. Mr. Excitement is absolutely awesome. It was the first Giants track in a while to really make me kind of turn my head 45 degrees like a dog watching his owner flail around the living room. But within 2 or 3 listens, I had Mike Doty's verses memorized. Rock on, the hubba, the beat is blubber, being stingy on the pike, like the one into the other, careen in tandem. Mint Car feels very different to me. Aside from the facts of its production that objectively make it different, the sonic palettes here are wildly different from most previous and subsequent They Might Be Giants efforts. The varied producers that assisted in its production help it take the shape of a true 2000s entry into that whimsical world of They Might Be Giants. It's still one I come back to all the time. The band has described the re-emergence of Mint Car into their live sets and onto Wax as being something personally fulfilling for them. Well, it's personally fulfilling for me too, for what it's worth. Now I just need to get a good enough job to buy the dang thing. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the Giants' foray into the world of children's music. Right after Mint Car, they'd released No. No is an album that sets out with the purpose of channeling They Might Be Giants' distinct musical stylings into the form that can be enjoyed and played for humans of all ages. And this effort would prove to be immensely successful. No success would warrant further endeavors into the realm of children's music with the albums listed here. These albums have all proven substantially popular among those looking for music suitable for all ages. I could break down these records in the same way in which I've done for their quote-unquote adult albums, and perhaps I really should for the sake of a fully fleshed out video, but rest assured the Giants have adapted their sound for universality without sacrificing what makes their sound their sound. Linnell is quoted as saying, "Usually on a TMBG record, there's at least one song that invokes death. Instead, on that, there's a lot of songs about going to sleep." Along with the numerous albums listed, the Giants would provide the music for Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, a fact that blew my mind upon learning it. Their expeditions into this realm of music provided them with more Grammy Awards, as the parents of the Academy were perhaps relieved to be able to play music for their children which didn't patronize them and sound as the equivalent of intellectual nails on a chalkboard. The Giants had established their own record label by this point, Imprint or what have you, like many bands that would follow suit afterwards. Idlewild Records would be a name expected on most, if not all, Giants releases until the current day. No was the first release that would become a piece of this puzzle, but Idlewild would assume the rest as well. After further showcasing some more digital technology clairvoyance by opening one of the first artist-owned web stores in 2004, They Might Be Giants would release their 10th studio album, and the next quote-unquote grown-up album.
Keep on hugging it.
How did you get me to do this in the first place?
Okay.
The place really looks like that. Like everything is tan and brown. The sky
The rabbit had the ball at the top of the key, and I was all like,
I'm open! But some of them must have slipped into drugs or something before the game because he didn't see me. And he passed it to the Deke instead, and the Deke slapped something. Oh, this was my greatest moment on the court. I was trying to high-five everyone aside, but there was a lot of commotion and excitement. And
You ever get those memories from your childhood that don't really recall a specific event as much as they kind of summarize an entire chunk of your subconscious? Well, one of mine takes place in the basement of my noni's house. There was this perfectly of its era beige box computer that sat against the wall, probably a Gateway or a Packard Bell or an old Dell or something. It had to be a Windows XP machine. I remember it very vividly because after my cousins had just finished showing me and my brother Homestar Runner for the first time, we downloaded a pack of sound clips that you could use to change the default sounds of Windows.
It's about time. Why don't you go outside or something? Nerd.
That blew my freaking mind. That's technological wizardry right there. I also remember this because this is the first moment in which Homestar Runner would burrow itself firmly into my brain, and it has never left since. I know I'm not alone. It's a perfect website with perfect cartoons, and it has not aged a single day. I owned the Speemail DVDs and the Strong Bad Sing CD, and I want nothing more to invent a time machine so I can find them, lock them away in a safe, and never be unsure of where their location is again. This moment in time is not too far removed from one of the next times I would distinctly remember watching Homestar. This time it was in the computer room of my cousin's house. There was one video that I would watch over and over again. I could watch it 9 times in one sitting.
The color of infinity inside an empty glass. I'm squinting my eye and turning off and on and on and off the light. It's for this experimental film.
Experimental film is now 18 years old, and upon my repeated listens as a now 20-something, I think I can say firmly that this is one of the single best choruses ever written. Every single note is played exactly where it should, exactly how it should. There is nothing else here to even slightly interfere with the sheer brilliance of this songwriting, arrangement, and performance. It's 2 minutes and 56 seconds of pure killer without a microbe of filler to be seen. This song was the first single from They Might Be Giants' 10th studio album, The Spine. The Spine is a really solid record that, in my opinion, sees the Giants firmly etching out a certain production style that would help bring future records to fruition. The record is very cleanly produced, with an emphasis on the clarity of instrumentation that would become a hallmark in many future records. In my mind, it occupies this preceding state before the Giants' albums of the 2010s, which feel like they took on a similar philosophy with a more stripped-back approach. The instrumental passages here are lush and feel as though they were created with the intent of pushing the sound of Hi-Fi Giants forward. In this way, this feels like the Wall of Sound Giants record, with everything from the first snare of Memo to Human Resources to the obviously show-stealing horn sections of Museum of Idiots, feeling grandiose, important, and impactful. The ways in which the DIY analog experimentation have morphed into fully funded studio experimentation have become blaringly apparent in tracks like Bastard Wants to Hit Me. The Giants have always been a band that has embraced recording technology to further the sounds of their studio albums, and now it feels as though the technology has fully caught up to them. This transitional period might be able to be poetically summarized by the demise of Dial-A-Song's original answering machine format. Linnell described it as mainly just dying a technological death, and after their second children's album, Here Come the ABCs, was released, one of my favorite albums of that entire decade would help further the band into the future. For being the first album in the Giants catalog where every song tracks over 2 minutes in length, The Else is one of the most attention-demanding and boisterously cohesive records in the discography of a band that has already produced several records of matchingly great quality. This video might as well just have been workshopped with the title "Michael wants to talk about They Might Be Giants history just so he can talk about why The Else is a top-tier album." As much as any one album could be in the discography of a band that has released critically acclaimed children's music, The Else reads to me as an angry record. While interchangeably making its way into my top 3 Giants records at any given point, it also holds the high honor of being tied for first in the prestigious Some Guy Named Mike's favorite Bush albums, matched only by Hail to the Thief. Bush is of course a large oversimplification here, as this album was notably influenced by the entire range of geopolitical strife that pervaded the aughts. Flansburgh recounts all of the files from the record in a computer folder simply titled "During the War," stating, "It's not the topic, but it is the backdrop. It was the thing that's happening that's just sort of poisoning everything around it." John Linnell said, "That period was also in the wake of the Iraq War, so we were kind of feeling bad all the time because of the shitty government that we had. Normally that kind of thing won't have a very direct relationship to our own theme, but there's a number of songs on The Else that were a reflection of how horrible everything else seemed at the time." I'm gonna consciously rectify a statement from like the 30 seconds I've had to dwell on it here. The Else doesn't read as an angry record. Its lyrical focus is bitter, sarcastic, and sometimes spiteful. There's a real sense of dissatisfaction here, and perhaps for the first time in the Giants' catalog, it's concretely noticeable over the course of an entire studio project. The Else is cohesive in every sense of the word. Perhaps more so than any album in their catalog, this feels like a record that sets out to perform a definitive circling of one idea, one feeling, and it succeeds effortlessly. Alongside longtime co-producer Pat Dillett, the Dust Brothers were enlisted for production efforts, and their presence might contribute to the ways in which I feel that this album takes on a unique and singular presence in their catalog. There's no way to concretely explain the ways in which this album just simply feels different among the musical world of the Giants, but a clue might be in those opening drum loops of "I'm Impressed." Distorted and bit-crushed, they serve as a wonderful introduction into the album's themes of whimsy in the face of some impenetrable shittiness. Not since "Kiss Me Son of God" and "Minimum Wage" have the Giant songs been so outwardly political. Warning, warning, TMBG lyrical analysis hat is on. "I'm Impressed" details a totally super awesome, sincere display of affection towards a strong-arming political regime. "Take Out the Trash" is a fantastic double entendre about pleading with someone to break up with their lame boyfriend and telling him never to come back again. I'll give you 3 guesses as to who I think that boyfriend is, and the first 2 don't count. "The Shadow Government" details the fun, super cool world of the Patriot Act, backed by a bona fide rocker that sounds like a chase scene in the middle of a sitcom about government surveillance. These aside, there are a few tracks here that keep their intentions a bit more up their sleeve and could join the ranks of deceptively sad staples of past albums. "Feign Amnesia" sticks out, as does "Upside Down Frown." If you've only ever heard one song from this album before, it's definitely "The Mesopotamians," a gleeful pop rock exhibit originally written for one of their albums made with tiny people more in mind. All of these tracks combine into one moment in the Giants' catalog that I feel is criminally overlooked. The Else is a piece of work that thoroughly demonstrates total quality, and I cherish it still for all the ways in which the band, the technological directions they've pushed themselves into, and the album all continue to showcase their unrelenting talent, as well as their ability to produce art that always feels refreshing. As we get closer and closer to today, a certain style emerges among the 2010s They Might Be Giants records that feels like another subtle shift representative of the way in which the music is crafted itself. The band's 15th studio album is entitled "Join Us," and the current core enlisted by the Johns has been set in place for a few years now. Linnell introduces them on the fantastic track "When Will You Die?" I've seen this band live in action after the release of "I Like Fun," with Kurt Ram on trumpet, and man, are they a treat to watch. It feels like throughout the 2010s, the sounds of TMBG were marked by an approach that seems totally antithetical to the ways both fans and the band themselves felt about their music around the release of Flood. Yet the full band apocalypse that desperate doomsday purveyors had anticipated outside the walls of They Might Be Giants live shows a few decades ago actually sounds pretty damn good. This approach makes itself apparent in Join Us and the success of Nanobots, and both albums do such an excellent job of presenting the adaptation of the Johns' unique musical stylings to the format of the lush studio record. If it started on John Henry and was exploding during The Spine, then it has shacked up and found a comfortable home on these records, nestled away in writing great hook after great hook. The band still found ways to alter that formula though, especially on Nanobots, where the song lengths all appear to be fingertips in their own right. Yet those fingertips were written as a collection of choruses. These are whole songs squeezed into runtimes that will provide them an inherent gift of brevity. Nothing ever has time to get stale. There are still a good few songs that have become favorites in the first leg of the album that cross over 2 minutes and even into 3. The title track and Black Ops are primo examples of this. The 2010s have been marked by this exceedingly playful style of rock band-ism, and that would become apparent when Dial-A-Song made its fruitful return in 2015. 52 Dial-A-Song recordings would be released throughout 2015, a streak of productivity that boggles the mind. These albums, Glean, Y, and Phone Power, all hold a pretty special place in my heart. Phone Power in particular, I think, represents my personal favorite of this styling that the band's put together during this era. Much in the way that Dial-A-Song shaped the earliest records of the band, I think the format dedicated itself to a fully realized ethos of these albums that just feels bright, joyous, and comforting. I got into these records reverse chronologically as I Like Fun had just released. I had just moved after living in Philadelphia, I was going back to school, and the band's pronouncedly pop stylings of songs like I Love You for Psychological Reasons, Say Nice Things About Detroit, All the Lazy Boyfriends, and Answer really helped me to feel like I was gliding through a much improved period in my life that's thankfully continued to this day. These albums were the soundtrack to me truly getting my head on straight. All the Lazy Boyfriends connected to me in such a meaningful way. I was the lazy boyfriend, man. I fight off the lazy boyfriend within me every time I wake up now. I was incredibly excited for the release of I Like Fun, and it's an album that sticks with me more and more as I think about the discography of TMBG on the whole. Much like The Else, I catch feelings of dissatisfaction off of it, but less outwardly angsty feelings and more personally realized ones. Tracks like This Microphone and All Time What feel like the band using their musical vessels to examine events in history that feel huge, whether it be present-day calamities or distant, but maybe not too distant, scenes of nuclear fallout and rubble. If they were active participants on The Else, on I Like Fun they're more storytellers, relaying a tale of a land once harmonious but ravaged by its own inhabitants. And, for lack of any more long-winded drivel in an attempt at summarization, that pretty much does leave us to today. Obviously, there's so much I've missed. Endless EPs, compilations of EPs, compilations of jingles done for Dunkin' Donuts commercials that I love so much.
Is it French or is it Italian? Perhaps Fritalian. Cleaning up after an all-night blowout.
Get up and go with all your favorite Dunkin' iced coffee flavors.
Singles, spots for other media besides Malcolm in the Middle, like the rendition of The Daily Show's theme for Jon Stewart, Cartoon Network stuff, more Homestar Runner stuff. I could just go on and on and on and on and on. The Giants released Book a year ago in 2021, right around my birthday. That sense of stripped-back, band-centric composition is ever present here, and perhaps this is one of the strongest examples in the entire Giants catalog of the band just letting their performances do the talking. Moonbeam Rays had me singing along in my car just as loudly as the first songs I ever sang along to in that seat. I Lost Thursday finds a way to penetrate the band's just absurdly deep catalog of phenomenally catchy instrumentation by finding this refuge in a funky synth bass line. Less Than One was stuck in my head for weeks on end, with Linnell's rising vocal melody in the chorus becoming the soundtrack on repeat everywhere I went, whether I liked it or not. They Might Be Giants are still doing it so exceptionally well. The band's shift from these really short songs marked by sparse instrumentation, tape machines, drum machines, and a conceptual approach that aimed for weirdness among just two people has now fully evolved. In this spiraling progression of music that this band has lovingly and meticulously crafted over 4 decades, there are some universal truths that remain. The Johns' lyrics will always incite endless debate over their true meaning. They will always be driven creatively to produce something unique to them. Seriously, it is nothing short of a magnificent all-time feat that 2 creative people have managed to remain such ruthless auteurs over this length of time. The last thing that has remained, and more likely than not will remain true, is that They Might Be Giants just know how to write damn good songs.
That is the musical world of They Might Be Giants. It's a legacy that's been in place seemingly since the band first did covers of Yoko Ono songs in silly voices. A legacy of creativity by a duo and later a group that pursued their passions with a persona unable to be maintained by anybody else. Of course, it helps to have as much technical talent as they do. Throughout my personal music journey, I have been and continue to be in love with bands that make a habit of showcasing their technical ability, and They Might Be Giants are no exception to that. But it's not the band's ability that solely captivates, it's their ability and willingness to seemingly always push themselves to utilize that ability in brand new directions, and the ease and seemingly effortlessness in which they're able to do that. It's created this entire planet of unique references, songs, ideas, and phrases that just burst more and more brightly the further you delve into their musical world. In their wholly singular vision, they've created this paradoxically universal appeal where these entrancing qualities that the band possesses just sucks new listeners further and further deeper into it the more and more they listen. And it keeps drawing me back in, and I've been a fan for years. Much in the way that John Linnell says during Gigantic, it's hard and sometimes feels almost pointless to quantify this musical world. There's such a large history of quality music that all I believe anyone can truly do at the end of the day to gain a cohesive picture of it is to try and recount their experiences with it on a personal level. Everything they do, everything they've done, from the shifts in sound to their witty lyrics, anything is perceived by you, the listener. But there also exists a personal relationship that every They Might Be Giants fan has with their music that, whether knowingly or not in the moment, soundtracks a lot of the most important events in their life and serves as signifiers and special markers for times that they really did kind of feel the extent of the human experience. There is the slightest chance in the world that somebody from the TMBG sphere watches this, and all I can say is thank you. It's cheesy, I know, but hear me out. In maintaining this barrage of creative material, you've provided me with songs that have marked events representing every emotion one human being can feel. They weren't written about me, but in my years, during my life, and in the lives of so many, they may as well have been. There's so much in every aspect of anyone's favorite band that one person can be excited about, and it feels like in They Might Be Giants, there's every single one of those aspects multiplied, plus about 300 other things that one can let flow out of them when talking about this band. This is the world of They Might Be Giants. Impossible to quantify, but provided you like the tunes, endlessly easy to fall into, endlessly easy to fall in love with, endlessly easy to feel all the possible range of emotions that you can to it, and very, very hard to ever leave. Okay, I think that's it. Alright, gonna leave. Oh, I forgot to talk about Dr. Worm! They call me Dr. Worm. Good morning, how are you? I'm
can tell.